Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to this podcast. I am super excited to be sharing with you a series of episodes where I answer questions that I received from my Instagram community. So a few weeks ago, I did the whole sticker thingamajig and I told people, I was like, hey, I'm going to go on the podcast. I'm going to create some solo episodes of just me answering your questions as best as I can. And specifically, I was soliciting questions about learning astrology. And I got so many juicy questions. At first, I thought it was going to be this casual thing, but no. So much flowed out of me. And I just kept, going and going. And I think if I were to compile all of these questions, they would be like 3 or 4 hours long, maybe a little bit more. So first of all, thank you for everyone who submitted the question because I really love answering questions about learning astrology. If you love me answering questions about astrology, I would love to know because maybe I'll do more of these episodes. It was just so fun to create. Just a reminder before we get into it that my course with Britton LaRue, Astrology as Praxis, will be starting on September 10th, 2022, and registration will be on August 26th to 28th. I'm super excited to not only be teaching astrology, but also to explore various pathways that you can use to integrate astrology, individually as well as in a community. Using astrology, yes, to help you understand yourself, right? That is definitely the point of this class. But also to expand your idea of who you are as a cosmic being and your role, your participation, your agency within this larger cosmic body. It's really a robust container, a beautiful, sturdy curriculum where we really actively invite in all of our faculties, right? Our mental, intellectual faculties, our emotional, spiritual, somatic faculties, to participate in learning and ultimately unlearning astrology and creating the astrology that we need and want in this moment. Check out our course page if this resonates. All of that will be in the show notes below. Okay, so back to the questions. Because they were all so rich, I really didn't want to fit this into 1 or 2 episodes because I think that might be a little overwhelming given how the episodes have so many different topics. And so I'm trying a new format here where I'm going to break it up into many different smaller pieces. So you're going to see episode 26 to 31 being these Q&A episodes. Episode 26 is where I cover a couple questions. One of them is really about what to say or how to deal with naysayers of astrology. And then the other one was really about how do we reconcile being a unique individual, right, with unique birth charts, as well as being, categorizable using the language of astrology. And so to me, these 2 questions are a little bit more philosophical and they really speak to like this duality of like the inner skeptic and the outer skeptic. So I grouped them together, and then episode 27 is my personal recommendations on learning astrology. So if you are interested in doing that and you think you will benefit from, a list of resources and me kind of reviewing those resources, listen to episode 27. Episode 28 is pretty technical. It's where I talk about houses, aspects, and stellium. I find that these 3 subjects are really the subjects that are for like advanced beginner astrology students are very much like alive, because we don't tend to talk about houses or aspects in like memes, so people don't really know about it that much. So if you feel ready to go into like the nitty-gritty of astrology, go to episode 28 for houses, aspects, stellium. And then episode 29 is where I talk a little bit about my current approach to interpreting natal chart, as well as where I stray from tradition. So this is an interesting episode. I think this one may be the more controversial one, if that's what you're into. Episode 30 is like my astrology ritual and practices, as well as a major life transit, which in this case, Pluto transiting through my very packed fifth house. So episode 29 and 30 are both a bit more on the personal side. Like they're really kind of my take on things. So if that's what you're interested in, or if you're interested in hearing my life story and my journey with Pluto, then definitely listen to episode 30. But both of them are pretty personal. And then episode 31 are really the miscellaneous questions that I couldn't really find a place for in the other episodes. They're really about Lionsgate and then housing contract and Chiron in Cancer. So yeah, I hope that you enjoy these episodes. Please also know that if you're listening to an episode where there are numerous questions, you can always skip ahead using the timestamps below in the show notes, right? So yeah, that hopefully will come in very handy, and you will find that very useful. If you are like, oh, I'm not really interested in this question, just jump ahead. And then finally, all of the intros are going to be the same for episodes 26 to 31. So you can, if this is your first time listening to the intro, well, you got to the end of it. And if this is your second episode that you're exploring, then totally just skip to the questions, right? Don't feel like you need to listen to the intro again. And you can use the timestamps for that. Okay, cool. That's me being my Virgo rising self, letting you know about all of the little details. And I think that's it. So enjoy this episode. Actually, more like this series of episodes that are super juicy, super exciting, pretty nerdy, and I will see you on the other side. Okay, so this next question is from Erin, and the question is, what is your current approach to interpreting a natal chart for a new client? So yeah, this is a trade secret. So I know Erin, and I know Erin's chart, and let me just say that is very much an 8th house thing. And also, I really love this question because I appreciate your orientation, that this, your question is really around my current approach, right? So maybe in a month that will change, and I'm sure over the course of my journey with astrology, there will be a lot of changes in how I read charts. I also feel like this question is fabulous to talk about because, I love free flow of information, and I think it's great to hear how other people read charts. I wish that that information is more kind of publicly available. And B, I really want to share this because I feel like this may really be helpful for some people out there, especially if you identify as more of an intuitive and maybe you're still kind of figuring out how to really integrate your intuitive practices and your intuitive gifts with astrology. Doing astrology readings is really a complex art. To me, a good reading is a mixture of space holding skills, a lot of space holding skills, conversational skills, astrological knowledge, and also, at least where I'm at, in my practice, I think a fair bit of intuition is really helpful. My goal in doing readings is really to share reflections, insights, and guidance that affirm or remind the person I'm reading for of their inherent worth, and also to kind of help people compose creative solutions to whatever is currently going on in their lives. So this duality, right? Of, on the one hand, really working with whatever is present, with the difficulty that this person is going through, with really affirming your basic goodness, and perhaps even removing shame from the picture, from the decision making, as well as reminding you of your creative agency. To me, these are really important things to at least attempt to introduce into the reading, right? I recognize that may not be every astrologer's goal. To me, that feels really important because that's personally part of my own process. And I also really like to connect with people on a heart level and feel like I'm not just kind of giving them a lecture about their chart, which again, there's nothing wrong with that, right? That may be a very valid way of doing an astrology reading and to really be with people in that capacity. But for me, like meeting where the person I'm reading for is at the moment feels really good and feels really life affirming and makes me feel really excited about my work. So, So those are kind of where I'm coming from. And my process itself is, really the first step for me is I sit in silence and I set up the reading space energetically. I tune my own physical and energetic instruments so that I can receive insights for the person that I'm reading for. And then after that, I really open myself to receiving the insights for whoever I'm reading for, right? So some of these insights, they may include the tone of the delivery that is appropriate for the reading, because, when you really tune into the person on a spirit level, right, as well as a space, I've learned to discern how to interpret the information that I'm receiving. And so sometimes I feel like maybe the reading needs to be more geared towards the practical, really helping a person give ideas and suggestions. And then other times, the reading may be more about affirming this person, right? And really seeing them, being with them through whatever it is that they're working through. And that's not to say that the two are mutually exclusive, right? But I think, it's kind of like the analogy I like to use is if you are in the emergency room, right? And you just chopped off, this is a bit violent, but let's say you just chopped off your leg, right? The last thing you want to do is for someone to come in and then talk to you about all the different ways that you can prevent chopping off your legs the next time, right? You really want someone to just tend to the wound, to like help you be with the pain and just make you feel better, essentially. And then other times, if you walk in, right, and really you are coming in, you're feeling pretty good, and you're just, wanting a preventative kind of discussion, discussions around how you can live your life better. And then someone comes in with all these suggestions about all these medications you can take. You'll probably be pretty pissed, because you're like, I'm feeling fine. Why are you trying to fix me? So that's kind of how I think about it. And I also sometimes receive information about what energetic frequency is appropriate for the reading space, and this is where things get a little mystical. As some of you may know, I've been studying energy work, and also I've been exploring the Akashic field for some time. And so really my work with this truly informs my reading spaces. And recently, for a while, I didn't really know how to integrate that. And I think, that really came from this feeling of having to prove myself as an astrologer, and a picture, I don't know, like an invalidating picture of what an astrology reading looks like. Like in my mind, there's almost like a figure of like an astrology professor or something like that that's kind of judging me with how I'm doing my work, and is like, oh, people are paying for an astrology reading, you need to give them an astrology reading. But the truth is, I've received a lot of readings from a lot of different people, and none of them are ever the same, and sometimes getting a reading with the same practitioner with two different things or two different concerns that I brought to them gave me two completely different astrology readings. So I don't think there's one way to do it. Often when I open myself up to receiving insights for the person I'm reading for, I do this before I even read the person's intake form thoroughly. To me, the energetic atmosphere or the energetic setting of a reading space is as important as the insights, if not more important. My goal, or maybe not even goal, but my hope is to create a space that really allows the person to maximally receive the information from a heart space. Because in my own life, when I'm able to really receive the information from my heart space, that's when I can begin to implement the suggestions or the insights that came through in the reading. And I've learned that the more I let myself trust the information that I'm given, both etheric information as well as intellectual information, the more I can either create that space from the get-go or adjust so that I can create that space with trust and with certainty. And then the third step is I read the person's intake form pretty thoroughly and note down any insights or any observations or any questions that came up. Now, not all of the observations will be discussed during the reading. Sometimes the information is just for my subconscious, to feel into like, oh yeah, this is maybe what this person's going through, and this is what's being lit up in either my space or our collective space, right? But even just opening up to the awareness that these concerns are present really helps to create that open and welcoming atmosphere. And then the fourth step is I actually open the chart and I start grounding the insights that I received within the chart itself. So this may sound a little weird or unconventional, or maybe more like a psychic reading, right? Or at least I know that my younger self, or even like me a year and a half ago, would have thought that. But I find that this way of approaching the chart, meaning, allowing myself to receive insights first and then ground it into the chart, right? Or allow the chart to inform me of creative ideas or solutions based on the insights that I receive. I found that to be really, really important, because if I don't know, or if I don't allow myself to calibrate energetically and attune to that etheric or spirit level communication, then at worst, the reading kind of feels like this act of throwing spaghetti to the wall and seeing what sticks. And at best, the reading is intellectually perhaps very robust, but I don't always feel like I really get to connect with the person that I'm reading for. Or it can have this like really lectury or like one-sided feeling, which personally doesn't feel that good to me. I feel like when I sit for an astrology reading, personally, I like to have a conversation with the person, and I trust that people who come to me for readings know that it's going to be a conversation, and that if they're just looking for someone to deliver this oracular reading for them, then they may find a different astrologer that may be better suited for that kind of reading. Meaning, if it's just channeled information and not so much about like creating a two-sided conversation, then there are other astrologers doing recorded readings, who are probably doing that much better than I can. For first-time readings, I usually try to stick to the natal chart, but there has been exceptions. Again, I really trust my intuitive insights to know which timing technique to use, whether to use it at all, or maybe this time is just about focusing on certain areas of the chart. In terms of the timing techniques that I like to use, I really like annual profection because to me it helps folks really build deeper relationship with their time lords or the planet that's significant for them within this year, right? Or I also like it if someone comes around their birthday. I also like to focus on transits if they're really kind of major. Like, for example, if it's a Saturn return or Uranus opposition or any outer planets on really important personal points in the chart. Like, for example, I have had a lot of readings with people, for example, who are currently going through Pluto on their moon. So that's a huge one, right? And also I think progressions can be really great for someone when they're kind of going through something that makes them, feel maybe a little bit isolated from the people around them. Like, I've had readings where people come to me and they're like, oh, I'm kind of going through this thing that seems a little random because nobody else around me seems to understand what I'm going through. And, when I look at the collective, it seems like people are also going through a different process and I'm not connecting my lived experience with the world around me. The reason why that is because progressions are unique to you, right? So progressions are more, I think of progressions more as like a symbolic technique, and it's more working through us in a very personal, very poetic level rather than kind of external, right? And so I think that can be a good that can be a good use of progression. And so I think this is a bit of a blend, right? Of like learning different techniques and getting deeper with those techniques and finding ways to resource yourself through different transits that come through or different progressions that you are moving through in your own life as a human being. And also feeling into, from what this person is sharing, maybe through their intake form or through what they're saying during the session, what is relevant, right? Like what's coming up for you, and trusting whatever you're being guided to may be relevant for this person and may be really important for them to receive at that time, or at the very least, interesting for them. To me, I believe that the primary focus of me as a reader is really to orient towards you as a whole human, right? I believe that useful insights or good insights are also temporally rooted, right? Meaning the right insight is not just the right information, but the right information at the right time. And so even though, I study astrology extensively, I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to studying astrology and studying as much as I can. I feel like my role as an astrologer during a reading is to really help you parse out, right? Because as any of you learning astrology may know, astrology is such a huge nebulous system, right? And so allowing myself to feel into what is calling me at the moment for this particular person is a huge thing for me. Like permissioning myself to do that has been really deeply healing and has really increased, I think, how I feel, I don't know, maybe the efficacy of my reading, but also how I feel about the reading, which I think is really, really important too. I bring astrological theories and insights and techniques to the extent that they feel important to share. But in a lot of my one-on-one reading spaces, moving from that place of really listening, of tuning in intuitively and meeting the moment has been really important for me. And sometimes that means that I will do a ton of background work, but often it means to really let myself be present with the human in front of me and then allowing whatever I've been seeing from their chart to inspire affirmations or creative solutions or new ways of thinking. So yeah, I think that's it for that question. And thank you, Erin, for asking that question. I really enjoy contemplating on that answer. Oh, and one thing I should say too is that, the fourth step, right, which was to really look at someone's chart and to begin making the connections, to me, that is where studying astrology is really helpful, right? So if you are wanting a bit more guidance around like, how do I do that? How do I actually read a chart, right? For the first time, what are some of the important signatures and markers and things I can begin with? Because sometimes I think that's really important, right? Like knowing or having a particular roadmap that you can use as a template, and then you can kind of amend to your own liking or change due to your preferences or throw out altogether is, I think, really important when you're beginning to do astrology readings. So if that's what you're interested in, we are definitely doing that in Astrology as Praxis, which is a course that I will be facilitating with Britton, my collaborator, or, really any astrological learning spaces, right, will teach you some sort of template that you can use, and then you can run off on your own. You can decide if you like doing it that way or not. So that's something I will add. And thank you for listening to the answer for this question. So the next question is a question that was asked by two different people in two different ways, but I think they're connected, so I'm going to combine them together. So Mallory asked, where do you find yourself most straying from tradition in your astrology practice, and why? And then Bridget asked, what is a piece of commonly believed astrology wisdom that you strongly disagree with? Well, damn. I love these two questions. To me, these are amazing questions. So first, I want to preface just by saying that, this is true for me, but also I think true for anybody. And I want to be really transparent about this. I can't really separate my own personal answer from my personality and my positionality and my chart, right? I'm a Virgo rising. My moon is in Gemini, and I have a Pisces sun. Many of you listening know that means that my big three is hella mutable. Right? So I think that really shows in my answers here. And also, you will likely see or hear a different opinion from me if you ask me next year. So I just want to preface by saying I'm continually changing. So this is just my answer for today when I wrote this answer. In my humble opinion, there's no one tradition of astrology in the West, right? And that's a good thing. I kind of take the Jupiterian view of time. I don't really see the deviation of modern astrology from traditional astrology as this big tragedy, right? Or like a bad thing or something to correct. To me, it's just what is. And maybe part of our role as modern astrologers or astrologers living in 2022, having the literature of modern astrology as well as, the revival of Hellenistic astrology, perhaps we are here born at this time so that we can synthesize the two and we can create, maybe a fusion or like our own version of astrology. What feels like tradition for one group of astrologers may be totally foreign from others, right? Because there are so many different lineages in the West. And also sometimes something feels like tradition because enough people believed it or enough members of a community hold certain assumptions or believe that it feels like tradition, right? So the reason why I'm saying that is because to me, tradition is never separate from the humans, right? Tradition is formed from habits, and habits are formed from questions and concerns and findings, right? And so to me, tradition is something that we can always question because it came out of a particular generation and their concerns and their questions and what they found out in the process, filtered through their own lens, right? And so, carrying that over to the next generation, of course, things are going to change. In general, I am not a dogmatic person. In fact, maybe my only dogma is that I'm allergic to dogmatic ways of thinking. To me, the beauty of astrology is really in how flexible it can be. And the history of astrology in the West, has been filled with a lot of oppression because many different people, religious institutions, people who are into scientism try to annihilate astrology and undermine astrology. But it is interesting because astrology survived nonetheless, right? And to me, one of the reasons why I think astrology survived was because it's flexible. There was a hot second when I started diving into Hellenistic astrology that I started to cultivate pretty dogmatic ways of thinking or considering one form or lineage of astrology to be better than another. But the more I study and the more I apply my studies, the more I reflect on it, I don't really see one form or one lineage of astrology to be superior to another. I just don't. To me, the totality of it all, right? The ways that astrology kind of fell from grace, fell out of use, the ways that astrology has mutated to survive, the ways that people misinterpret the traditions in the 20th century, the more recent Hellenistic revival, sort of in the 70s up to now, right? All of that represents the entirety of astrology in the West, right? All of the complications, they're all part of the history, right? I think that we do ourselves and maybe even our clients or the people we serve a disservice when we don't allow ourselves to learn from the entire buffet, right? This is what I'm talking about when I said I take a Jupiterian view of the history of astrology, right? I tend to think of them as all-inclusive. I don't know, maybe this doesn't really make sense to you, and take what you want, right? But this is my show. So a parable I like to use, or maybe like a metaphor, is like if I go to a buffet restaurant and I say, I'm only going to eat the roasted chicken, not the chicken parm, because I don't like processed things and I don't like chicken parm. I think that's totally fine, right? I can say I don't like chicken parm. I don't like processed meat. But I don't think that it makes a lot of sense for me to be like, chicken parm doesn't exist or is not valid as food because it's processed, Like, is that even my decision to make? Who am I to say what's valid and what's not? Yeah. So, the first thing I will say, maybe the one thing that I, have a contention with, right, is about technical prowess. And I don't really know, honestly, if this is coming from tradition or if this is coming from my own inner critic. I'm not really sure, because I tend to find myself drawn to teachers who are not super technical in their ability, but people who are really able to create something very regenerative and thought-provoking from maybe even just having very little technique, right? I tend to be gravitated towards teachers like that rather than people who are super into the techniques. But I don't think that you have to be extremely well-versed in all of the techniques in order to be a good astrologer. Some of the best readings that I received used the most basic techniques. At the same time, I also disagree with the other view, right, that exists out there, that you don't need to continually make yourself learn new techniques or continually question your own understandings, as well as significations of the planets, the signs, and the houses. Because in my opinion, you kind of need to do both. You need to continue to be in front of other humans, to learn how to give readings, to learn how to hold space, to teach the humans who come to you, right? To learn how to do this better and communicate your message with more clarity. Astrology readings, it's such a saturated market. And I think that's honestly amazing. That means that the people who come to you for readings or are following, you in your newsletter or your Instagram, right? They're probably following some sort of resonance or interest, and there's a high likelihood that they will have something to learn from you, and you will have something to learn from them, right? At the same time, I really like the challenge of learning new things and kind of questioning my existing knowledge, because for me, that's a really integral piece to being a responsible practitioner, to consistently question myself and what I think I knew about astrology. To me, the thing about techniques, especially like timing techniques, is that they take a very long time to really integrate into your practice. You have to see a lot of different people, try out a lot of different methods to make sure that you can deliver it in a way that makes sense. And the reason why I'm saying that is because, a lot of the times, or at least like younger me, thought that in order to be a good astrologer, I need to know all of the techniques, right? But intellectually knowing all of the techniques, knowing the procedures, is not equal to being able to use them well. So I think that really takes time, and it's okay to be like, okay, this year I'm going to be learning progressions and I'm going to be using it for all of my consults, and I won't be looking at anything else because I'm focusing my study on progressions for a whole year, or annual profections or transits, right? That to me is a very valid way of operating with astrology. And that, this idea that like technical prowess means that you know all of the things, I don't think is true. In fact, I would say it's better to just know a few different techniques and really be able to use them well and make them really make sense for the people that you are working with, whether that's students, clients, or friends, whatever. From Hellenistic astrology perspective, some astrologers whose practice are rooted in Hellenistic tradition really put a red tape around the usage of natural zodiac, right? They really say like, oh, do not use the natural zodiac because that's not coming from the tradition. I don't know how I feel about this because I waffle back and forth with the natural zodiac view of the houses, right? So let me explain this maybe a little bit better for those of you who are not super into this, right? What I mean by the natural zodiac view of the houses is, the first house correlated to Aries, right? Second house correlated with Taurus, etc., etc., etc. I personally don't really use natural zodiac anymore in my own practice, but I remember when I first started learning in evolutionary astrology, we use the natural zodiac. And I remember it being such an easy and intuitive way to start creating delineations, right? It kind of gave me enough confidence to start allowing astrological insights to flow through me, which honestly gave me a lot of confidence, or enough confidence to then start deconstructing, So I don't really see our learning process with astrology as like this linear march. And again, right, like that totally has to do with my Gemini moon. It's like if you watch that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, that's what it feels like to be in my mind at any given time, right? So maybe that's just me. But for me, it actually has been really beneficial to try out different techniques and then to like scrap them, right? And then replace them with a new way of looking at things, and then scrap them. And then kind of continue to do that chipping away, because something that I found in my own learning experience, and again, this is personal preference, but maybe some of you will resonate, is that orienting towards fluency is much more fruitful for me than orienting towards mastery. So I'm going to repeat that again. Orienting towards fluency is much more useful for me than orienting towards mastery. Because when I make myself think about mastery, somehow things start to get really muddy. Like I get really stuck. I'm afraid of doing the wrong thing. I am afraid of making the wrong move. I'm afraid of being irresponsible, and yada, 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 yada. Whereas when I'm when I'm orienting towards fluency, all I really care about is like, can I play with this? Can I allow myself to like make this fun? Can I remix this? And so when I allow myself to do that, it begins an actual relationship with the body of knowledge, which in this case is astrology. So to me, whatever is helpful in making you more fluent, more quickly, that is a tool to consider using in your teaching. And, maybe like you can even caveat that, right? Like by saying that this is not something that you should totally agree with, but you can use this if that feels good to you, Also, like natural zodiac is old. It's not like it began in the 20th century, like modern people start using it. No, actually, if you look at the history, it really started in the Renaissance. So I'm not entirely agreeing with the perspective that there's nothing valid to the natural zodiac. To me, it's two different statements, right? To say that natural zodiac wasn't part of the oldest tradition versus natural zodiac is either not real or not right? Like to me, those are two different separate statements. And I think I try to be very careful and very clear about that. In my own, like from a practical perspective, I found that using the natural zodiac is so helpful. And there's a lot of value of using the natural zodiac for the houses in my astrology learning journey. And again, what I will emphasize is that, you can unlearn something that you've learned. There's nothing wrong with that. And then, from a more modern astrological school, I think something that I really disagree with is this. I perceive that there's like a commonly held belief from the perspective of a lot of modern astrologers that because Hellenistic astrology or Renaissance astrology is quote unquote old, it's no longer relevant, right? Because they came or they were born out of like a different culture, a different context, maybe even languages we don't even fully know and understand or can translate, then it's not worth considering seriously because we are modern people, right? Certain modern astrologers simply say things like, essential dignities don't resonate with me. It doesn't feel good to tell someone that their Mercury, their chart ruler is in fall and it's detriment, right? It's a very fatalistic language. And I don't like that. I don't use that in my practice. Well, sure. First of all, I totally respect people saying I don't want to use something in my practice because you have every right to, right? It's your practice. I'm not going to tell you otherwise. And other astrologers who tell you otherwise you don't need to listen to them. You can if you want, but you don't have to. But I do think that I kind of want to unpack this a little bit, right? Something that I've been thinking a lot is about how astrology is really a helpful tool for us to ask what else is out there. How can we use astrology as a creative practice to build new worlds, right? To build new universes, to build new ways of thinking, rather than simply validating our ways of being, I think that validating ourselves is really valuable, is really important, especially because so many of us really deal with a lot of invalidation on an emotional level. So I think, any chance I get to validate the humanity and the infinite amazingness and the inherent worthiness of a person, especially, in a consulting setting, I will take that opportunity, right? At the same time, I think as someone who also identifies as a lover of astrology, to me, I'm not interested in using astrology just to continue to reaffirm and reenact my current worldview, right? I want to be surprised. I want to be swept off my feet. I want to be shown where I'm wrong, I think that's when these practices can be helpful, right? I mean, if you think about like tarot practice, for example, there may be days where you're like, what do I need to know about my relationship? Because you've been really anxious about it. And then you've pulled the freaking Tower card, and you're like, no, right? I didn't want to get this message. But to me, like, that's the value. Like, if astrology can't, like, I don't know, snap you out of your own mental echo chambers, then like what's the point, So to me also, like, this way of thinking, like, oh, I don't like thinking about the essential dignities because like the words like detriment or fallen is so like fatalistic, doesn't feel good to me. To me, often when I speak to astrologers who feel this way, it's often because they haven't really also invested enough time to build a solid enough relationship and understanding about that concept. And they haven't really taken the pains to understand the context, historical or, sociological, right, of the cultures from where this, language comes from, right? And this way of thinking comes from. To me, often that means that you haven't really spent enough time considering, questioning, learning to get to a point where you can use it with mastery and fluency and also explain it in a way that makes sense to your people, right? Like when I use words like fallen or in detriment, like I try to be deeply caring and I use these words not lightly, right? I take the time to really be with the person and ask the person, like, how is their experience, and maybe this is something that can make sense to you. And if it doesn't make sense to you, can you talk to me? Let's have a conversation about this, right? So to me, in general, I will say first that, this, the answer to my question here might be ruffling feathers left and right. The Hellenistic astrologers now hate me, and then the modern astrologers also hate me now. But to me, it's really sad when our conversations get too stuck in the binary of new versus old. Something that I really appreciate, there was an interview with Demetra George with Chris Brennan on the Astrology podcast, and Demetra said something along the lines of like the dogmatism of astrology often comes from like people really practicing certain types of astrology, and like that's where they make their living, right? And so people feel the need to harden because they need to prove that their point of view is valid. To me, this is a little sad, and I think we can name it as like maybe the byproduct of like capitalism, and to me, we don't have to be like this. Like, to me, the new reality that I want to create is, on the one hand, realizing that there's nothing new under the sun. And also, every generation is always going to find ways to talk about things that really matter to them. Every generation will challenge traditions, challenge cultures, and ultimately this is very positive because we need to contribute to this body of knowledge. If astrology is something we can use to help us in our lives, then we need to have a say in changing astrology as well. And I think that's fabulous. In general, maybe you've heard me say this before, but I really like confusion. I really like discord. I really like kind of like being proven that I'm wrong, because to me, they're perspective opening. They feel much more true than studying in order to come to sort of like a finality or a conclusion. So yeah, that's my answer for this question. Thank you for asking this question, Mallory and Bridget. All right, I hope that you found this episode to be interesting, thought-provoking, helpful to you. As a reminder, there are a bunch of other Q&A episodes around this episode, really from episode 26 to 31. So if you want to hear me talk more about different questions that people submitted, feel free to really find the topic that's interesting to you. And if you're resonating with this episode, definitely check out Astrology as Praxis. It's going to be a year-long journey of learning astrology, integrating astrology, understanding both yourself and the world around you using astrology as a framework for, really practicing what it means to be human. Britton and I would love to see you in the container if you resonate with our voices. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, rate, review this podcast, and if you're on Apple, I would love to receive your review. Something new that I am currently creating is some content that I will share with you as a gift if you write some reviews. So if you do write reviews, please take a screenshot before you submit it and then send it to me on healingthespiritpodcast@gmail.com. And then I will get back to you when the bonuses are ready. Just want to say that this is a practice that I find inspiring from one of my teachers, Sabrina Monarch. So I'm like, I want to do the same too. And it will be a totally different content, obviously. But just naming Sabrina as my inspiration for reciprocity. Until next time, I hope you take good care of yourself. And I'm sending you so much love. Thank you for listening.